The Prime Minister Liz Truss has announced that she's reversing the ban on fracking in the UK. Now, the practice was halted in this country in 2019 amid opposition from green groups and local concerns over earth tremors. But there has been calls to rethink its use given the soaring cost of energy. Now, Professor Richard Davies is our fracking expert for the night. He's a petroleum geologist at Newcastle University. Charles McAllister is the Director of Policy, Government and Public Affairs at UK Onshore Oil and Gas, the trade body for the UK onshore oil and gas industry. And Tina Rothery is the co-founder of NANA's, an anti-fracking campaign group. Welcome, all three of you, to the programme. Right, I'm looking forward to sinking my teeth into this and understanding more, because we see the headlines and, you know, we may have read a few little bits and pieces about this, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand the wider impact of fracking either way. So, Richard, we'll start with you then, and I'll start, I guess, with the simplest question of them all. And for those listening, they may not necessarily know what fracking is. So if you could tell us that would be great.
Yes, this is a process that's been used in the oil and gas industry for the last couple of decades, particularly in America, where to access gas and oil that's found in shale, it can be accessed by drilling a borehole, possibly deviating the borehole so it drills horizontally through the shale layer, and then pumping high pressure water underground to create cracks. And those cracks allow the oil or gas, which has been stuck in the rock for millions of years, to come into the borehole and move to the surface. And it's something that the UK has considered doing, of course, as you've just said. But we've found that when it has been done, it's caused small earth tremors and other concerns in the US around air pollution, the pollution of water, traffic, etc. So it's an intensive process. You need trucks, you need materials, and it's something that's worked extremely well in the United States.
Right, and we should say, just before I go any further, that Richard, you're very much kind of on the fence on this. I think I read somewhere earlier on that because of that, you kind of sometimes face questions from both sides of the argument.
Yeah, Nick. Yes, I'm unpopular from both sides on occasion. That's not my job to be popular. What we're doing is carrying out the research that people have been asking about. They've been asking sensible questions over the last decade since this started in the UK around 2011. And I'm here to be absolutely neutral and just to look at the science and the facts and then report those through peer-reviewed journal papers, which people can read and digest at their leisure.
Right, brilliant. Just before I bring Tina and Charles into the debate then, you mentioned this is a popular form of gathering gas, I guess, in the States. Why is it so different here? Because I read somewhere that the shale is different here to in America. Is that right?
Well, yes, the shale is different. We tend to have very thick shales in parts of the United Kingdom. There are several key differences. Let me just go through them. Firstly, in America, the farm owner, the person who owns the land, may well own the mineral rights. So it's in their interest to see fracking take place. Secondly, in the US, they had around 1,500 drilling rigs that they could redeploy, move around the country, refit and use to accelerate the production of gas from shale. So those are two major differences from what we see in the US and they see in the UK. And perhaps the most obvious one, I'm sure listeners are aware, I mean, Texas is a big place. There's large expanses of land. We don't have that luxury in the UK.
Right, gotcha. Okay, well, let's bring in Charles McAllister, the Director of Policy, Government and Public Affairs at UK Onshore Oil and Gas, and Tina Rothery, the co-founder of NANA's, an anti-fracking campaign group. Welcome to both of you. Charles, I'll start with you then. So is there any evidence that there are vast shale gas reserves here in the UK?
Well, there's a difference between resource and reserve. The oil and gas industry does love to use words that sound very similar, but actually have totally different meanings. So the resource, the British Geological Survey have identified as being 37.6 trillion cubic meters. That's enough for 500 years. The question is, how much of that is extractable? A commonly applied recovery factor is 10%. Therefore, there is enough sufficient reserve potential in the UK for 50 years. If I could just say, you see, every single measurable metric you could use overwhelmingly supports the case for fracking in the UK. And it is an incontrovertible fact that imports do not offer the geopolitical, environmental, or economic benefits that a domestic shale gas industry would.
So what fracking has taken place in the UK so far then? 2019 is when we put a stop to it. But before that, how much has actually happened here?
Oh, well, the only two horizontal wells that have been into the shale that have been high volume hydraulically fractured have been at the Preston New Road site. And it's correct to say there was a moratorium introduced because of seismic events. If I could just run through exactly the sort of regulatory background and then what happened. So the regulatory limits that were set for us were the tightest in the world for hydraulic fracturing, and also the tightest compared to other industries such as geothermal. So we were set a limit of 0.5 on the Richter scale, which according to a study by Liverpool University is the surface equivalent of sitting down on an office chair. Now, the moratorium was based on a report done on the Preston New Road 1Z well in Lancashire. The largest event of that well was a 1.5 on the Richter scale, which is the equivalent, again, according to that study from Liverpool University, of dropping a honeydew melon in your kitchen. Even if we look at the largest event, the 2.9 from the Preston New Road 2 well, the surface vibration from that of an event that lasted 2 seconds is half of the maximum permitted at construction sites and quarries. So the regulations that are applied to us were, if they had been applied to other sectors, such as the geothermal, quarrying, or coal mining industry, or construction, none of those industries would be able to operate in the UK.
Okay, right. So with those stats and what you've said there, let's bring Tina into the conversation. And I guess my first question for you is, why do you oppose fracking then?
I think just a couple of things to pick up on what have been said so far that cause the residents here in Lancashire a great deal of concern. When they talk about the earth tremor and it being a 2.9 that would feel a bit like, a bus going past your house, that isn't what hundreds of residents felt. They felt it very much, and there was damage to homes. Also, I think the most important thing about that 2.9 earthquake we're talking about is that work on that site had been made to stop 2.5 days before that earthquake. So it hit the 0.5, that low, what they're calling, what did he say it was, the tightest regulations in the world? Well, those regulations were devised by the fracking company Quadrilla to match what it happens to the geology in the UK, which is not the same as it is in the States. So consequently, that regulation is what it is because the fracking industry told us that was what was needed. And the fact that that earthquake reached the 2.9, despite work having stopped 2.5 days prior. When you do an earthquake with a quarrying or things like that, that's an engineered earthquake. They know what they're doing. They're controlling that. When it sets off on a fracking, well, no. What can you do after you've hit 0.5? You've shut down operations. You haven't shut down the earth tremor. You haven't shut down that seismicity. It's going to keep going until it's gone. Another factor about the UK that's very different from the States is that we've had a lot of coal mining in our past. The journey of, once you hit a fault or once a tremor started is in coal mining areas, Nottinghamshire and so on. There's a real risk then that those earth tremors can lead to fracturing under the ground that will then go into where the coal mining was. So no, there's a lot of reasons to be terrified. Also, I suppose on a personal level, the reason we set up Nanas was because I'm a grandma and I'm concerned about childhood health, and the instance of childhood leukemia in the areas where fracking takes place is high. These are things, and breast cancer in women, early term loss of pregnancies, heart problems, difficulties with foal births of horses. I mean, there's just, the list is endless, and I really can't understand why after spending over a decade fighting this, we're having the same discussion, and yet nothing in the UK geology has changed.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay, Richard, I'm going to bring you back in on this just because there were some statistics thrown around there when it comes to health and things like leukemia. So if you could just like help us tidy that up, what do the studies say about things like that?
Yeah, I think health is one of the most difficult things to study, and I'm not an expert on that, but talking to American scientists, it's really difficult when you do see, I believe, waves of health issues to be absolutely certain as to what that cause is. And you've got to be really clear there isn't other things going on, such as just change in the people living in the community, therefore change in the gene pool, etc., could cause some of those effects. But so I think that's the hardest question that scientists have been asked to tackle. If I could go back to the earthquake, I think it's worth pointing out to your listeners why these things happen. I just want everyone to imagine a hovercraft, and everyone's seen a small hovercraft before. Trying to push that hovercraft along is very difficult unless you've filled it with air. And when you fill it with air, suddenly you can push that hovercraft across a field, across some grass. Now, that's exactly what's going on as you pump fluid into a fault, and those faults are perhaps ready to shift already. And as you push the fluid in, you allow the fault to slip, just like pushing the air into the bottom of a hovercraft. The problem with this, Nick, is that when the fracking was done in Preston New Road in 2019, the faults that caused the earthquakes couldn't be seen. They were not imaged. Using 3D seismic technology, which is what was agreed was the right mechanism, they couldn't be seen. So it's not been possible to identify which faults are going to cause the earthquakes. They tend to be less than 3 in magnitude, but nevertheless, people feel them, and that worries people. So I think the health area is a very, very difficult one. We know a lot about earthquakes, but unfortunately, scientists cannot predict exactly when and where an earthquake will shift. If we could, we'd have saved tens of thousands of lives in very earthquake-prone zones. In the UK, the maximum earthquake we could ever have is around 6 in magnitude. And the coal mining industry has shown us that they're very unlikely to go much beyond 3 for fracking, because we're fracking in similar aged rocks with a similar stress regime as the coal miners excavated over the last couple of hundred years. So shouldn't be much bigger than magnitude 3, but people do feel them, and it's concerning for them.
You mentioned some of the technology there that was used to try to, I don't know if preempt is the right word, but try to predict and combat those earth tremors. What's changed now? Because is it just a case of desperation in a way? Because we stopped this in 2019, and is it a case of now we're in the situation we're in when it comes to gas supplies to the country, that we've turned back to fracking?
Yeah, scientifically, not much has changed since 2019. It's not as if in the last 2 or 3 years we've stumbled across a solution to this. I think the big questions that face everyone, really, the government, local planners, members of the public, is, firstly, is there a place in the UK that's geologically more boring than Lancashire? In other words, where we don't expect earthquakes to happen, where we can see the faults more clearly, and we couldn't see them in Lancashire. And what is enough confidence? What would people be happy with? And thirdly, has the massive hike in the gas price changed people's opinion? Back in 2021, actually, most people did not. Well, 45% of people in a public attitudes tracker done by the government did not support fracking, and 17% did. Has that changed? So those 3 questions: is there a better place? Have we got enough confidence? And have public attitudes changed because of the change in gas prices and energy costs?
Charles, has public opinion changed, in your opinion?
Absolutely. So if you look at some polling that we commissioned YouGov to do, we asked, would you accept fracking in your local area if you got 25% off your energy bill, which we can deliver through our community benefits package? Imports cannot do that. And a majority in the UK said yes, an overwhelming majority in the north of England said yes. So to answer your question straight, I would say absolutely. Now, in terms of some of the other points, if I may, there was a study from Public Health England which assessed the health risks from shale in the UK, and they said with a properly regulated industry, it absolutely could be managed and the risk is low. On the coal mining point, which is, I think, an important one to raise from Tina, look at the coal authority's map of where the former coal mines are. What they critically say is 85% of where the former coal mines were, where there is shale, is deemed low risk to development. So we are not going to target the 15% that is at high risk. That would be incredibly foolish.
Can I just ask you something in relation to that? I know you're saying it's low risk, but when you have a place where the residents are, even low risk, and even though we're saying all of this, maybe they'll tolerate it. You know, you have to consider other things as well. I know that when we looked into this originally, getting insurance for your home and your property in an area with fracking, with the likelihood of the earth tremors, is going to be very difficult for people. Also, that sense of, you know, I think your quality of life in that area, the value of your property, all of these things will be impacted as well. And I'm sorry, I don't take it, because you are in the industry, and I don't take it that you are going to fairly say that this is going to be okay, because you know as well as I do that in order to produce the amount of gas that we would need to do to make any difference at all to the quantity of gas, you know, available, is going to take hundreds and hundreds of well sites. And we are a tiny island that is densely populated, and you've got to bump into a church and a village and a school, and it's not America, and you know that. And I really don't understand why you're back here trying to tell us it'll work when we absolutely know it can't. Saying, let's just try this again. It's been 11 years of trying. You've not succeeded.
Okay, Tina. So I think it's cheap political theatre to go for the man and not the ball. If I can just address
no, it's not political theatre. I'm pointing out that you have an interest.
It is. Well, if you just let me
go ahead, Charles. Go ahead.
If you just let me. So especially in terms of how many wells are needed. So you're right. I mean, what we've modelled, what we've said is to make the UK self-sufficient by the 2030s, we would need between 100 and 400 sites. Okay, but what a really key important point in this is, you see, in terms of delivering units of energy per acre per year, so energy over space and time, if you like, fracking is the best technology in the UK. To give you an example of what I mean here, so a shale gas pad is about 2 hectares in size, about roughly the size of a football pitch. To generate the same amount of energy from a wind farm, you need a land area 725 times the size. So the idea that this would be a huge encroachment.
How many wells per site are you talking about? It's really important to know that. How many wells per site are you saying on a 2 hectare site?
10 wells.
10 wells on a 2 hectare site.
Absolutely.
And you propose about 100 sites throughout the UK, so 1,000 wells. And how much do you think that's?
No. It would be 4,000 wells.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah. So that's what it would be across. Yeah. So across 400 sites, that's what it would be. But in terms of, again, if you're concerned about the amount of land we would use or number of wells, you cannot then say, okay, but fine, we want wind and solar. What we're saying here is we need an all-in approach. There needs to be total change in the psyche here. Last year, the UK produced the least amount of energy for 50 years, totally unacceptable. So there needs to be a total overhaul in government thinking.
Can I just add, Nick, on this question about wells?
Go ahead, Richard.
And again, it's based upon research we've done and published in journals. One of the things that was really interesting is we found out that onshore in the UK, there are already 2,150 wells approximately. About 640 were drilled in the 1940s and 50s as part of the Second World War effort. And what we found is that I became concerned that around 100 of those wells are what are called orphaned. In other words, the business that drilled the well no longer exists. It wasn't taken over by anyone else. 100 are orphaned. And quite a few were drilled during the Second World War. And then that business was taken over by another and another and another. And I think there is a hanging question. If you drill 4,000 wells or even 100 wells, will the companies that drill those wells have the right safeguards in place so that someone clearly owns them and owns any pollution that could come from the well after it's been abandoned. And of course, during operations, that's easier. But let's say in 10, 50 or 100 years' time. And we do already have a small legacy well problem in the UK. Not a big one, but a small one. It will get bigger, I think. I think that's a real potential. In the United States, it's absolutely huge. There are tens of thousands of orphaned wells drilled where no one knows who owns them.
Can I just add in a point to that? I would really encourage people, if they want to go and have and see the Tinker Lane site that iGas Energy drilled at the very edge of the Boland Basin. If you go and look at it now, there's nothing there. It's a field. So companies will commit and have committed to decommissioning. But what we're looking for is to try and get the policy in place first so we can actually drill them.
Right. I think
decommissioning is important.
Safeguards need to be in place.
Right, Charles. I just wanted to put a question to you because the big issue that's really put fracking back on the table, I guess, is the energy crisis. And we've just had this text come in, and it says fracking production is sold on the world market, while that of the sun and the wind remains in the UK. If that energy is sold on the world market, then how does that help our energy situation? Does it mean or does it in any way help us make us more self-reliant?
Yeah, okay, it's a totally fair question again. So it's not sold on the world market, okay? It will be sold into the UK market, point one. Point two, this idea, and I've heard it been mentioned by anti-fracking groups, that we would export the majority or something to that effect. Name me a country on earth where they've increased natural gas production and then simultaneously increased net imports. It doesn't happen. If you're basically asking what you're effectively asking me is what impact will it have on the price? So there's three ways that shale gas can reduce prices in the UK. Number one is, as I've mentioned before, through local community benefits. Route two is, you see, if we continue down the business as usual approach, because you will not see any costed assessment which doesn't show that we need gas. Every scenario shows that we need gas out to 2050. The question is, where do we get it from? If we continue down business as usual, we're over-reliant on the spot market for liquefied natural gas. We have to compete with 42 other countries, effectively send up a flag with a high price in order to attract boats. The more self-sufficient we are, the less we have to do that. But admittedly, that does need scale. And then option three is the industry has already said they are willing to engage to sell natural gas at contracted prices, especially to the blue hydrogen production facilities of the future, because that's a good life cycle approach for a emissions point of view, because shale gas has a lower carbon intensity than imported LNG, as well as employment, tax, energy security.
Okay, we're rapidly running out of time, so I guess I'm going to end on a question for you, Richard, just as our expert. Now that we're seeing Liz Truss row back on the decision that was made in 2019 about fracking, are you expecting this to take off and see more fracking sites across the UK?
I don't think so. I can't see it. I have to disagree with Charles in his optimistic view on this. 11 wells have been drilled to explore for shale gas in about 11 years. That isn't a rapid acceleration. I just feel that there's, unless public opinion changes, I think it's very difficult to get these wells approved. And what is enough in terms of confidence that people like Tina want to see from the scientific community or from industry? I'm not sure we can provide enough.
And when they say that they're looking for our support in a community, and then they dangle, well, we might give you like 25% off your energy bills. That's not support, that's desperation that will bring people to them.
Well, listen, we are out of time on this. Thank you to all three of you for helping educate us on fracking. That's Richard Davies, fracking expert for the night from Newcastle University, Charles McAllister, and we also had Tina Rothery. Right, our midnight meets with